This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome, Rabbi, to what I believe is part 9 of our series on Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. So, in part 1, we discussed the history of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid's family. In part 2, we discussed the character of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid himself. In part 3, we discussed the opinion of the Noida Yehuda. In part 4, we discussed Pilpul on the Noida Yehuda. Part 5, we discussed the Shita of the Divrei Chaim. In part 6, we discussed, let's see, to look back, the opinion of the Shem Aryeh and the story of the Maharsham. And in the last part 7, part 7 we discussed whether Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid wrote it. And part 8 we discussed the reasonings and the logics for why you shouldn't marry a woman with the same name as your mother-in-law. So here we go, part 9. Part 9 we're going to speak about an incredible Machlokes between the Chochmas Adam, who's the Avram Danzig, Talmud of the Noida Yehuda, Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, and the Maharsham. That perhaps when Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid said you shouldn't marry a woman with the same name as your mother-in-law, that you shouldn't marry a woman with the same name as your mother, it was only in very limited circumstances. Namely what? Let's take a look at number 31. La yisa bachur zakena, v'lo zaken yolada. A young man should not marry an old woman. So let's say somebody's 18 years old and he's coming out of high school. He should not marry an 84-year-old woman. Or v'lo zaken yolada. A 90-year-old man should not marry a 19-year-old girl. Yeah? Shedavar zeh gorim liznos. This is illicit. It's not also if they both want. V'ayin b'sefer Chasidim, isimin shinayin gimel, ad simin shin salidad, midine zivugim. V'da, dema shekasav v'tzavas Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid simin chavav shelo yisa isha sheshma kishem imai, oishmai kishem chamev. That which Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid says, don't marry a woman whose name is the same as your mother, or his name is the same as your father. Hudavka kishehem mishulashim. That's only if it's 3 generations. Kagoin Adam sheshmai Ruvain, a man whose name is Ruvain. V'chasnai shmai Ruvain, and his daughter married someone Ruvain. That Ruvain v'mikach oid chasan zeh chasan sheshmai Ruvain azay lo yatzech. Only if the Zayd is Ruvain and the son is Ruvain. If the grandson is Ruvain, then it's a problem. V'chein isha sheshma Rivka. Let's say you have a woman whose name is Rivka. V'chein kasav l'hedya b'sefer Chasidim siman tafayin zayim. V'oilam toyim is that people make a mistake. People make a big deal about this tzava Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. We've just decreased the probability by most cases, if the father-in-law is Avram Yitzchak Tzvi and the son is Avram Yitzchak Tzvi, the chances that the grandson-in-law is going to be Avram Yitzchak Tzvi are nil. Most cases, it's not an issue. That is what the Sefer Chasidim meant. And the Chochmas Adam quotes the Sefer Chasidim in Siman Taf Ayin Zayin. So let's look for ourselves. Look at number 30. Look at number 30. Shnei Achim. This is Sefer Chasidim Siman Taf Ayin Zayin. Hanasum Shnei Achayos. 2 brothers married to 2 sisters. Echad mehem yamos, oy lo yatzlichu. 2 brothers who married to 2 sisters, one of them will die, or will not be successful. L'kach lo yisu, therefore you shouldn't get married. Or one of them should get divorced. Im hanasa davar kach. I know of situations where that's what happened. Echa mehem meis, or echa mehem megarish. Okay. If you have 3 or 4 people who live in the same house with the same name, they will not be successful. Oizara, v'chein beis chasanim, she'oisim nesuim b'Shabbos echad, lo yatzlichu, hayamas echad. Not good to have two chasanim on the same Shabbos. V'chein yesh zivugim shelo yatzlichu. You could have matches that won't be successful. Oishneim, oyachamehem, avu ben hanesun beis achayos, a father and daughter, father and son who are married to two sisters. Oyemu bas, or a mother and daughter, shnei achim are married to brothers. Oy adam shehesi bitay la'achei ishtai, or someone who marries his daughter to his wife's brother.
Uncle.
No.
No, it's not. It's not related.
Right.
Wife's.
Your wife's brother. So marries his daughter. It's his daughter, not her daughter. V'chein ha'ishu almoin. Likewise, a man who's an almoin. V'yesh lo ben. And he has a son. V'nasa almana. And he marries an almana. V'yesh la bas. And she has a daughter. Umasi bas ishtoi livnoi. And the man's son marries the man's daughter. Her daughter marries, her son marries his daughter. So his son marries her daughter. That's not a good idea. So if two people get married, their children should not marry also. Oy ben ishtoi labitai. Or the son of his wife to his daughter. Okay, here we go. A man took a woman, her name is Rivka. Why we're always blaming Rivka, I'm not sure. Or a different name, doesn't have to be Rivka. So he took a woman, her name is Rivka. The kid took a woman, her name is Rivka. It won't be said, Timtza hi loy tatzliach. Doesn't say. Timtza hi loy tatzliach, shehi meshuleshes. It comes out that she will not be successful because it's 3. Ayhu meshulash, that what? Ayhu meshulash. Or if he is 3, shoisha v'abas habas lakol gimel shemais, nimtza hu lo yatzliach. So in other words, if there are 3 Rivkas in a row, she won't be successful. And if there are 3 Yankels in a row, he won't be successful. So here the Chochmas Adam says clearly, you see from the Sefer Hasidim, that it's only 3 generations in a row, but 2 generations. In other words, if the father-in-law is Yankel Pipik and the son-in-law has the same name, it's okay. It's only when there are 3 in a row. Comes the Maharsham, and the Maharsham says that the Chochmas Adam made a mistake in reading the Sefer Hasidim. You'll soon hear what number it is. Says the Maharsham that the Chochmas Adam did not correctly read the Sefer Hasidim. Now, if we do read the Sefer Hasidim that way, that the problem of marrying a woman with the same name as your mother is only by 3 generations, that would answer the question that we asked from the Gemara in Soita in the beginning. Because remember number 7, Shmuel Saba, the father-in-law of Rav Shmuel Bar Ami, Mishmei de Rav. Shmuel Saba, the father-in-law of Rav Shmuel Bar Ami. So we see that you're allowed to marry somebody with who has the same name as your father, right? Because Shmuel Saba was the father-in-law and the son-in-law was Shmuel. So the Seder Hadoros try to prove from there that we're not Nizhar. No, it's not a raya that we're not Nizhar. It's only a problem by 3 generations. But look at the Maharsham, look at number 33. Umashashal b'din shemay shel chasan v'chamiv shekasav chachmas adam b'shem sefer chasidim the dafka b'meshulashim. It's only if it's 3 generations. Hinei b'sefer Chasidim. Siman Tavayin Zayin. Mayri, here's the case, Rabbi Sai. The Chochmas Adam says the Maharsham misread it. Because Ruvain, in the first case, married Rivka. Ruvain married what? A woman. And his son Ruvain married a woman. So you say, how could the daughter, how could the second Ruvain's wife marry a Ruvain, but that's the name of her father-in-law? And we said, you're not to name the name of your father-in-law. No. In the case of the Sefer Hasidim, think carefully. The woman who Ruvain married, the first Ruvain, is Stam Shprinza. Right? In that case, what's the problem over here? The problem that we said is if let's say, the problem of the Sefer Hasidim, when it's 2 generations, is when a woman by the name of Rivka wants to marry a man, Yankel, when Yankel's Rivka's father. That's when it's a problem. He wants to marry somebody with the name Yaakov when her father is Yaakov. But, then it's a problem even 2 generations. But, in a situation where, let's talk about these 2 Rivkas. Rivka number 1 is marrying a guy, Yitzchak. Yitzchak's son, to the first woman, she's not her mother-in-law. Because Yitzchak was an almana, so he remarried somebody with a name, and then his son married somebody, and then the grandson is also Yitzchak. In other words, like this. In the case, it's confusing. In other words, what the Chochmas Adam wanted to say, that when is it a problem to marry a woman? When is it a problem for a woman to marry somebody with a certain name? That's only, right, you're now to marry somebody with the same name as your father. Right? So the Chochmas Adam said, no, it's only 3 generations. You can't have 3 women, you can't have a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter all married to Ruvain. So the question is, but that's what the Chochmas Adam wanted to say. That Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid never said a father and son can't marry somebody with the same name. It's only a grandfather, son, and grandson can marry somebody with the same name. So the Maharsham says like this. Let's take a look at it inside. Look at number 33. Umashashal b'din shema shachasan b'chamiv shekasav ha'chachmas adam shem sefer chasidim. The davka b'meshulashim hinei b'sefer chasidim siman tov ayin zayin mayri kisha Ruvain nasa isha sheshma Rivka. Ruvain married somebody by the name of Rivka. Uvenoi nasa Cain, and his son married somebody by the name of Rivka. Then it's davka b'meshulashim hainu kishein imo shalaben. That's only if the first Rivka is not the mother of the second Ruvain. Kishen imash Rivka shma Rivka. Ela nasa isha acheres achar misas ishtar rishayna. Oisha nasa oida acheres. So it's like this. Uvechahai gavna davka mishulashim. Sho'ava ben uben aben nasum nashim. Oisha isha v'abas abas bas la kol gemoshemos la yatzlichu. In other words, like this. In a situation where you have 3 people, what does that mean if you have 3 people? In a situation where you have, let's say, 3 generations, then, here. In a situation where Ruvain married a girl named Rivka, okay? Then Ruvain's son, now Rivka is not the mother of Ruvain's son. Rivka is not the mother of Ruvain's son, right? Ruvain married a girl named Rivka. After, let's say, Ruvain's first wife passed away. Then Ruvain had a son, or Ruvain has a son. His name is Shmerel. Shmerel wants to marry a girl named Rivka. He can marry a girl named Rivka because Rivka is not his mother. Then Shmerel's son marries a woman, and he wants to marry a woman named Rivka. That's okay, because Rivka's not his mother. But it can't be 3 in a row. That's when the Sefer Hasidim, when the Sefer Hasidim says that a grandfather, son, and grandson cannot marry 3 women with the same name, that's when the women are not the mothers of any of these boys. So a grandfather, a father, and a son cannot marry 3 Rivkas in a situation where Rivka number 1 is not the mother of the son, and Rivka number 2 is not the mother of the grandson. That's when it's usher by 3 generations. That's clearly the case of the Sefer Hasidim. However, if Ruvain number 1 is, if let's say the father is married to Rivka, and Rivka is the mother of the son of Ruvain, then he cannot marry somebody with the mother's name. In other words, you're right, the Chochmas Adam is talking about Mishulashim, because the Chochmas Adam is talking about a scenario where none of the women are anybody's mother. That's what he's talking about. He says, Adam shalakach isha shema Rivka, ubenoi lakach isha sheshma Rivka, but that woman who the person took is not the mother of his ben.
If that were the case, wouldn't it say clearly Mefurish?
That's what he does say, Mefurash. Sefer Hasidim says that's the case.
Does it say Mace or
no? It says the first guy took a wife who's my Rivka, and then his benoi, not from that marriage. It doesn't say from that marriage. Benoi lakach isha shema Rivka, ubemenoi lakach isha, but it's not the aim and the aimimai. He says, Aval, we're not talking about taking a woman who's going to have the same name as her mother-in-law. Because in this scenario, right, let's say like this. You want to take three men, right? 3 men. The first one, the grandfather took a woman by the name of Rivka. So the son cannot take a woman by the name of Rivka. Why? It could take a woman by the name of Rivka because that Rivka is not the same name. It's not her mother-in-law's name because the first Rivka is not her mother-in-law. Says the Maharsham, this is not my take on the Sefer Hasidim. Ella Mamar v'Rabbi Hagon HaKadosh Marenu Rav Shalom Abezin Kal Kodesh Bells. I heard this from the earliest Bells, the Rabbi Shalom Bells, that it's only the Sefer Hasidim who says it's Asr when it's Meshulashim. That's when the women or the men are not related to each other. But if they would be related to each other, then it would be Asr even 2 generations.
What does the stepmother in Halacha have a status? Is there any status to her vis-a-vis the marriages? Because apparently here it's not. These women who are not the mothers of the Ruvain, they're the stepmothers.
Regarding this, it's only 3 generations. I mean, it does have status after 3, but in terms of names, it's only an issue after 3 generations, not after 2 generations. Let's see, there's the Maharsham repeats himself in Chelek Heisim and Chavches. Here, let's look at this. He says, Mashkos of the Tzavos Rebida Hachasid b'Meshulashim, Kvar Nidfas b'Sefer Echad, Michach Meizmanenu. So in the first tshuva, the Maharsham says this is not my opinion, this is the opinion of Rav Shalom of Belz. In the second tshuva he says, and how do I know Rav Shalom of Belz says this? He says in a recently published sefer, in the name of the Admar of Belz, he says that which, it's a toss, that when the Sefer Hasidim says Dafka Mishulashim, that's not talking about Chasan v'chamev or Kala v'chamoisa. That's going on what it says earlier in Alman. In other words, you say, why didn't the Sefer Hasidim say this? It's because he did. In the previous case, he's talking about an Alman who had a ben, and he took a woman, Shishma Rivka, and the son who he had before, he also took a woman named Rivka. V'gam oisei ben hayolei ben meisha cheres, who took a Rivka. In other words, how is this explicit in what the Sefer Hasidim is saying? Because in the previous case, he says v'chein ha'ish, who's an almain, who has a son, who married an almana, and has a daughter. So it's going on the case of ish who almain v'yesh loy ben. So on that case, Adam Shalak Achishma Rivka, it's going on the case of the person who was married to an almain. Okay, so this is a famous machlokes between the Chochmas Adam and the Maharsham. Chochmas Adam is very lenient. He says it only applies 3 consecutive generations. The Maharsham says no, 3 consecutive generations is only a problem when is it only a problem by 3 consecutive generations? When the women are not related to each other. Meaning the grandfather took a woman, but that woman's not the mother of the son, and his wife is not the mother of the grandson. But if it would be a mother-in-law, in other words, if somebody took a woman by the name of Rivka, and Rivka had a son together with Reuven, that Reuven cannot take a woman named Rivka, says the Maharsham. However, the Chochmas Adam says, under all circumstances, you could be lenient unless it's 3 generations. So what does Rabbi Vadia say about this? Look at number 35. Shal Setshuva is Yabia Oimer. V'ayin b'sefer Yafel Alev. If you look in the Sefer Yafel Alev, he brings the tshuva of Rabbi Rachamim Yehuda Yisrael, the Av Bezdin of Drodus, who leans both of his hands on the Chochmas Adam. He's not giving him an abracha, chas v'shalom, with 2 hands, but he's supporting him that you need Meshulashim. And says Rabbi Vadia, the Mechaber over there is very machmir on this inyan, and he supports himself from the Arizal, and he wants to say that since the Arizal is machmir, that you can have a daughter and her mother-in-law with the same name, the same thing would be applied by father-in-laws, says Rabbi Vadia, you cannot extrapolate from one to the next. So bottom line is, you should be aware that there is a very big machlokes achronim. Whether the Tzavar Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid applies even by 2 generations or only by 3 generations. We happen to have seen earlier in the tshuva of the number 29, the Samach Tzedek, where he was asked about this thing. I believe he brings in this factor. Let me see. He says, "B'dvar sheshal mena kishur atinaim." First, he quotes the Shav Yaakov that many Gdom were not makbid, and he quotes another Yehuda. So there are tshuvas that take this into account, as we're going to see soon, that Rabbi Vadia does bring this into the equation. He quotes over here, if you look at number 37, Rabbi Vadia quotes the Minchas Elazar and Zek Savyadi, they argue on the Chochmas Adam. So the Chochmas Adam Shita is not necessarily widely maintained. Let me see. Okay, so this will be the end of 1 minute. This is the opinion of the Chochmas Adam, but as we're going to see in the next segment, the Sam Sofer himself seems to support the Chochmas Adam Shita. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.